the platform. And in addition to Enterprise, there's XML Author. And so what you can do is use XML Author for a lot of the people who are just merely creating content. And then use FrameMaker for your actual PDF generation.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of on the same page there. Okay, I have a hand up, which means I'm going to attempt. This is where things will get interesting. Okay, I have a hand up from somebody named Eric, and what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and unmute you. Well, actually, somebody else is going to have to do that. So if the organizer, Alan, if you could unmute Mr. Sheeler and see if we can get him on the audio line to ask a question. I heard a click, and I believe you're in. Eric? No. All right, I'm going to suggest that you go ahead and park your question in either the chat tab or the questions tab. It is actually quite difficult for us to manage the audio, and when it does come in, bad things tend to happen. So I have one question here about Flare. We are not going to cover Flare in this webinar. If that is something that you're interested in having us do, I would be interested in seeing that. So, you know, if you're interested in that, in addition to the one person that asked about this, please let us know. Okay, I have a question about exporting XML from InDesign. That's an interesting question. And by the way, just as a giveaway on any sort of presentation, when somebody says that's an interesting question, that's code for I'm thinking about the answer. Okay. There are a couple of different ways of exporting XML from InDesign. In InDesign CS4, there is something called IDML, InDesign Markup Language. You can export from InDesign directly to InDesign Markup Language. It is most similar to MIF or something like that. It is basically it includes all the page geometries. It includes everything about the layout. So from an XML point of view, it's not a very useful kind of XML. If you wanted to export from XML, from InDesign to something like DITA, what you would have to do is either output IDML and then transform to DITA, or you would have to work with that structure pane and you can map your paragraph styles and your character styles over to elements and then output XML based on those elements. Again, quite challenging. You know, it is sort of a non-trivial kind of operation. So it can be done, but I think you have to have a really compelling reason to go there. That would be my main concern. So, okay, it looks like several people saying yes, we are interested in Flare. So we will take a look at seeing if we can put something together for that. Okay, a question about right to left. Simon, did you address this? Right to left languages, any workarounds? There are rumors about workarounds to output for right to left from FrameMaker. Everything that I've seen about it indicates that it is a complete sort of hack. I've heard rumors about people actually using mirrors, which I think is hilarious. If you need right-to-left processing, my advice would be to bite the bullet and use XSLFO, or possibly consider InDesign, because InDesign does have right-to-left processing. I would not go down the FrameMaker road. Before I did that, I would actually go down the road of using Word and its right-to-left processing. And for those of you that know me, that's a kind of a statement. And regarding Flare, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I concur that using the Open Toolkit is probably the best way you can do the right to left right now.
Yeah. It looks like Alan's put the Flare DITA support review that we did in the chat window. So if you all want to take a look at that, that would probably be what we would base any webinar webcast content on. So good questions there. All right. So I wanted to move on and talk a little bit about what to consider. How are you going to make your decision of what you're going to do in terms of PDF output? The first thing you have to look at is the question of your platform requirements and your technical resources. So what I mean by platform, for example, is are you required to work on a Mac? And if so, you've got, for example, issues in that XMetal does not run on anything other than Windows. Oxygen is a Java application, so it will run on multiple platforms. FrameMaker, as you know, is Windows only. Now, there are workarounds with that on Macs. You could run Boot Camp or Parallels or something, but there is that issue. So what are your platform requirements? Where do you need to be authoring, and are there considerations there? There's also the question of, for example, right-to-left. I mean, if you need right-to-left languages, then really I would go down the road of the things that support right-to-left languages. That is probably a reasonably compelling argument to go to FO and to deal with all the issues that you run into in FO, because it does actually have quite good right-to-left support. Technical resources. Who do you have on staff, and how technical are they? Can you bring in consultants? I mean, if you're going to code FO, who is going to code the FO? So what do your resources look like? Do you have people available to you that can help with this? Can you get people to help with this, or is it simply out of the question? If you have FrameMaker experts, but you don't feel as though you can get to a place where FO is a reasonable thing to code, then staying in FrameMaker is, quite possibly the best possible approach for you. So you have to look at your resources and your technical skill sets and what the possibilities are there. Typography. Do you need the world's greatest typography? Do you need documents that are really, really, really lovely? And if you are producing art books, if you are producing, a typography guide, if you are producing things like that, you may have some typography requirements. Another thing to consider, again, is the language issue. Another interesting one that Simon's been working on is things like ancient Greek and support for ancient Greek glyphs, and making sure that those are actually working in your chosen environment, which, by the way, I believe you're doing in not FO, but HTML through XSL, correct?
That's right. Mostly it's XML to XML conversions, but that does raise an interesting point, though, and that is to consider your character encoding and your languages, because of course FrameMaker 8 only recently in FrameMaker 8 did they add Unicode support. So if you're doing anything that requires Unicode, of course you cannot be anything before FrameMaker 8. So that's worth considering.
And then the last three here are velocity, volume, and versioning, the 3 V's. What I mean by this is that you need to look at the issues in your document production workflow around this. Velocity, how often do you produce content? Are you generating new documents every 6 months, every 12 months, every 5 years, every week, in a nightly build? Those are very different kinds of velocity. What is the volume that you're generating? Are you generating 200 pages at a time every night, or 2,000 pages once a week, or is it 20,000 pages nightly? A workflow that requires 20,000 pages nightly is going to look very, very different from a workflow that requires 1,000 pages every 6 months. Your versioning, we haven't talked much about conditionality, but how many different versions of your content do you produce? And how difficult is it to produce those versions? If you have lots and lots and lots of versioning, you're going to want a more automated kind of approach to your workflow. So what we've done here is built what I would not describe as the world's prettiest chart, but a chart that basically maps typography against the 3 V's, volume, velocity, and versioning. The higher your typography requirements are, that's where you end up with InDesign, but very low automation. If you have high velocity, volume, and versioning, that pushes you towards the DITA Open Toolkit, but very low typography. And we've got FrameMaker kind of sitting in the middle of those two. Pretty good typography, pretty good on the volume, velocity, and versioning. Now, there are things that you can do to move these in various kinds of directions. So, for example, if you wanted InDesign, but you want greater velocity, you could use InDesign Server, which will push that InDesign bubble to the right towards higher velocity. With FrameMaker, the DITA FMX tool is going to help you a little bit with some of the automation and less tweaking, making it behave better. DITA Open Toolkit, if you want better typography, you can look at